Let's call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Director Cody,
Here.
Director Gibson, not here. Director Zimmer,
Here.
Chair Ohilsky.
Present. Okay, so do we have any board member comments? On non-agenda items? Excuse me.
No comments from Mark.
None from S&T.
Okay, then we'll move on to item number 4, which is the special presentation that Dan was just talking about. So Dan, you want to introduce that one, please?
Actually, I think I'll turn that over to Director Zimmer. I
Okay.
think Director Zimmer has more of the background and had requested that we have the special presentation on the agenda.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Dan. So as everybody knows, Golden State has a nitrate removal system at our Rosina plant. We've been operating that nitrate unit for well over a year, along with a few others that Golden State operates throughout the coastal district. And as we've discussed the nitrate treatment options in Los Osos, we understand there's limitations to the nitrate treatment, both from a cost, disposal, overall operation of nitrate removal. So in our quest to try to operate as efficiently as possible and keep the costs down and ultimately look at the water resources available in Los Osos and the upper aquifer portion of the basin, there's some yield there that could potentially be utilized. So in our process of working with nitrate removal, been in contact with Purelight, Kathy Swanson, looking at performing a pilot program that would improve the efficiency operation using different regenerates and disposal opportunities. So thought it was really interesting, would be appropriate in this venue and something to share with the community that the techniques and science behind nitrate removal and treatment are progressing, and that there are options that may be better suited to upgrade our existing treatment plant, or if we consider treatment plants in the future, we would definitely want to consider these types of improvements. So at this point, I think it would be good to turn it over to Kathy and share her presentation and some of the background that we have on these new improvements and efficiencies for nitrate removal.
Okay, Kathy, before we go on, do you let the record show, Daniel, that Bruce has joined the meeting?
Apologies for my late arrival.
That's okay. So Kathy, we're back to you. I just wanted the record to show Bruce was here.
Noted.
Perfect. All right. All right. Thank you all. Are you able to hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. So yeah, future of nitrate removal. So I'm Kathy Swanson. I've been doing groundwater remediation for about 14 years. I cover the west half of the US. And about 2 years ago, I moved over to Purelight and joined their team. Francis Boudou is also on the call. Francis is our Director of Applied Technologies. And it was, and he's just a resident genius, by the way. I mean, anything Ion Exchange was conceivably invented in his brain. He's amazing. Thank you for being here, Francis. One of the things we were talking about a couple of years ago when I joined is some of the issues with nitrate that we've got out in the West. And we've got some really new and great ideas to minimize waste. And I want to talk to you guys about that today. Francis, did you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to actually listen to Kathy because I've been in this business a bit longer than her, more than 25 years, ion exchange, water treatment, etc. So I think the direction we are going with nitrate options really are very interesting. And Kathy has a couple of them that she would like to share with us today. So Kathy, take it.
Yeah, thank you. So we're just going to very, very high level of nitrate removal with ion exchange. We'll talk about some of our new resin. It's a shallow shell technology, how it works, how it can work for you. We'll talk about alternative regenerants. So we could either go instead of a brine waste, having a product, or if that's not feasible, depending on the water quality, that perhaps it could go to the sewer. And then we'll talk about next steps. So, you know, this will be quick. Hopefully it's sort of a review for most of you. Nitrate's an anion in the water, meaning that it's negatively charged. And so you remove it easily with a strong-based anion resin or SBA resin. And you traditionally use a high-capacity SBA resin when you have lower sulfates. So ion exchange resin basically trades one ion for another. And usually a bead, a traditional bead, is activated all the way through. And so the water comes in, the ion exchange occurs, and you've got the anion that will diffuse into the bead. And if you can see my arrow, hopefully, in this traditional picture down below, you see that things can get stuck in the middle. Whether it's foulants or whether it's just the nitrate, it takes more salt and more time to get the stuff in the middle out. And if you get foulants in there, they're sometimes very difficult to get out. So we make a bead, it's called a shallow shell technology, where instead of activating it all the way through, the core is still an inert polymer. And so it's sort of like using smaller beads because you get the efficiency of a very small bead, but the advantage is you still have the pressure drop of a large bead. So you need less salt and it's more efficient to regenerate and you don't get that foulant stuck in the center. So some of the advantages are you can use 15 to 25% less salt. Because you use less salt, you need less water for the rinse. You actually don't lose any capacity because most of the activity is truly taking place in that outer portion of the bead. And like I said, you get a more efficient regeneration. And, you know, this idea kind of came when Francis and I were talking about this. You know, it's been a proven technology in softening for at least a dozen years now. And so these are examples. This is PFA 300. This is a very similar anion resin. Sometimes it's used for nitrate removal. And so a traditional bead, you can see over time, it's actually getting, you know, less efficient between its regeneration cycles. And with an SST resin, it maintains that efficiency because it's not getting fouled. This is the same resin versus the SST version. And you can see that the rinse volume is reduced by 33%. So what we've done is we've taken a resin, a high capacity SBA resin that is used pretty often in drinking water systems. And I think Golden State Water might even be evaluating it for a new system, and that's our A600E, which has been used in industry for years for nitrate removal, chrome 6 removal, uranium removal. And we applied the same high capacity with our shallow shell technology to create SST A68E. And so, you know, our hopes are that with this resin, we can increase brine line capacity, decrease spent brine haul off, and get more clean water access to communities because it really lowers the cost of having to run these plants. So we did some projections. We looked at the Los Osos source water, and I think this number may have been a little higher, Mark, when we were looking at it, but I hadn't looked at a counterflow system. Your system is very efficient already. But we know we can get at least an 8% waste reduction using the SST resin, and we can get 20% less sodium chloride used in the regen plant. And we've got a program, it's called Purolite Resin System Modeling, where we can look at it and tell you how things are going to run. There's a couple other projects that we're working on, and kind of the way that we got started working with Golden State Water is we're doing a project with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And as one of the senior capstone engineering projects, they're using the SST with some of the Golden State Water and using an ammonium bicarbonate regenerant instead of sodium chloride. And the end product is a fertilizer. So this is kind of cool because these students are not just engineers, they're also bio resource engineers, and they're testing that fertilizer to see the efficiency of it. And they're doing a control with a regular produced fertilizer. So they're taking the water, they're extracting the nitrate and making fertilizer to see if we can have an end product from that water instead of a waste product. Another alternative that we've looked at, and I found this picture on the internet that I thought was just so cool, that San Luis Obispo had one of the oldest sewage treatment plants in California. I thought that was kind of cool. But if we're not able to make it into a fertilizer or an end product, would it be possible to send that waste to the sewer? So really, using an ammonium bicarbonate, a lot of what goes to the sewer that's detrimental to the flora in the digesters and stuff is the high chlorides. And so by using an alternative regenerant, am I saying that right, Francis? Is it the chlorides or the sodium? That's the issue. It's the chlorides, right?
More the chlorides, I think.
Okay. Okay. So by using alternative regenerants, we may be able to avoid that and be able to send that waste directly to the sewer. So we can evaluate regenerants like sodium bicarbonate or even CO2, which would essentially form a sodium bicarbonate or a bicarbonate. And bicarbonate bacteria love, so that would not be an issue for the sewer. So in order to kind of test this out, we'd love to perform a pilot. So what we would do, we would look at SST versus a traditional resin, so like our A600E. And then we would compare using SST resin with alternative regenerants. We would want to work with the Division of Drinking Water to make sure that they approved it, that they would give a permit for whatever was put together, and we would want to prove out the O&M costs. And so that is kind of the presentation in a nutshell. A little bit more on what we're doing. We're in the process of building a pilot unit. It might take, I don't know, 2 or 3 months till that unit is available. And it will be able to do a lot of this piloting, and a lot of this piloting will be sort of the COVID friendly, where once we set it up, it's automated and can be run remotely. So, it kind of keeps in mind safety and health for all involved. Mark, what are your thoughts? Turn it back to you.
Yeah, great presentation. Good job with an overview and bringing to the table some of the important discussion points that we've had. I think it's just a great opportunity. Like I said, it really captured my attention just with Los Osos, the upper portion of the basin, and nitrate levels there. I know that we've had discussions. Golden State wells, S&T wells have some nitrate concerns, and so really, not having a brine line like some of the other larger infrastructure down south and places like that, the disposal costs are driving the O&M costs up significantly. And then if there are ways to produce that waste stream into a product, that's just a win for our environment. So I thought it was a great opportunity to jump onto a pilot test, look at what that entails in more detail, and really see that as the next step of moving forward with this. So just wanted to really bring it before the BMC, other water purveyors. I thought it was an interesting concept, and really open to any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Mark and Kathy. Yes, I thought it was a very good presentation. Does anybody have any questions at this point in time?
This is Charlie from S&T. We're very interested to hear about this also. And Mark, I may have a conversation offline with you about this a little bit, our mutual interest in this area.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I know the district has some ion exchange removal also. So if we want to continue this conversation and have a pilot, if we do move forward with the pilot program, is that something we want to, have it be in line with the BMC, and so we're all participating in it? Is it something that just Golden State does and reports? Open to those kind of suggestions too. But Charlie, definitely, you're welcome to participate in this process, and I'm available for any discussions you want to have.
Yeah, I think it's something worth talking about, excuse me, with our staffs and with you guys. So, yeah, so thank you very much, Mark, for bringing that forward. And thank you, Kathy and Francis. I appreciate it. So,
I have one other question, if I might, Marshall, is I wonder if this could be scaled down to work with an individual household septic tank. I know that over our water basin in Los Osos now, we have requirements mandated by the Regional Water Board that individual septic systems must be retrofit with individual nitrate removal systems. Have you ever used one of these on a small basis like a household septic tank?
Francis, I'm gonna let you answer that one as well.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So you asked me to answer it, right?
Of course. Well, that's why you're here, right?
Unfortunately, we have not looked at that part of the market. We didn't even think it was part of the market. We're actually going after the municipal market, where most people have problems for disposal of their brine. But are you thinking of treating the water before it gets into the septic system? Is that what you asked, or are you asking to treat the septic system itself?
Well, I think somebody from the county might be able to provide, perhaps Bruce Gibson might be able to elaborate on this, but there's a mandate. We have permitted high-density septic fields in Los Osos over the basin that are emitting large amounts of raw sewage into the basin water. And the Regional Water Board is requiring that no permits are made for repair of these systems in 3 areas of Los Osos, and requiring that they be instead retrofitted with individual nitrate removal systems.
It's
yeah,
sorry.
Bruce, you want to clarify that?
Well, so I think what Charlie's talking about is the local area management plan that the county is in the process of finalizing with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. I don't think we're right now at a point to suggest that there are a large number of septic tanks that are putting raw sewage into the groundwater. It's certainly a concern. It was the concern and that led to the installation of the sewer system in Los Osos, because in the densely populated part of town, we had quite a number of septic systems that were discharging into their leach fields that were just too close to the standing groundwater level. And so the output of the septic tanks had elevated nitrates that ended up in the water supply. And that's in fact why why some of the water purveyors are denitrifying upper aquifer water. Outside the area of the sewer service area, there are still septic tanks. I don't think we have studies right now that suggests that as a class, they are contributing to groundwater pollution. What the regional board is concerned about is that some of them could possibly be. And if for one reason or another, the septic system as designed fails through age or improper installation or exactly where it was sited, and where development continues to increase the density of these things, we may in the future end up with potential negative impacts to the groundwater. So the LAMP, as it's called, specifies situations and areas under which more advanced water treatment is going to be, septic treatment is going to be required beyond a simple septic tank and leach field. And our board is going to be considering our approval of this a little later this year. But again, we could get the regional board to comment more fully. But I think that the question is the idea of the effluent coming out of the discharge end of a septic tank could well be, is usually high in nitrates. We expect the natural process of percolation through the vadose zone to take care of that. And instances where it doesn't, I think the question is whether some kind of secondary treatment along the lines of what you've described here might make sense. I think that's really a question for engineers in the regional board.
Right. Well, I think yeah, and I appreciate Charlie's question and Bruce's response. And I think that, Francis, you said you were dealing with municipalities and not private situations. So, that may be something that you may want to consider, but I think that is the best answer we're going to get at this point. So, but thank you for the question, Charlie, and thank you for the response, Bruce. So I'm going to go to public comment on this item right now. So can we have public comment on this, Laura?
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Interesting presentation, and always hopeful that we can lower that brine waste stream. I had a question on the sludge removal and the idea of then using what I guess is not brine anymore, and the nitrate as far as using it as a fertilizer. There are the other items that don't get processed out of a sewer treatment plant. I can't remember what they're called, but it would include medication, residuals. Everybody likes to remind us of the Viagra that ends up in our drinking supply afterwards. Would this process still leave those products in the water that you're using and in the fertilizer? Because that's one of the reasons that we don't support sludge application to ag land, is because of the toxins that are in the end product.
If I
Okay,
may.
thank you. No, we do the answers to the questions at the end, pardon me.
Okay.
So, Lindy, do you have anything else?
No, I'd be curious to see how much is already being extracted through Golden State's and S&T, I think I sounded like have a nitrate removal, how successful that is and how much is water is being brought out of that process.
Okay.
But that's all.
All right, thank you, Lindy. Any other public comment before we answer
There's
the
no
question?
other public comment at this time.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, somebody else just came in. I apologize.
I
All
saw
right,
that
Patrick,
hand
you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Patrick McGibney. I'm just wondering how this is cost effective as far as the other way that nitrates have been removed. How would this save the community?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patrick. So, all right, I see no other hands being raised, Laura, so we'll close public comment. And Mark, do you want to try to address some of those questions and then turn them over to Kathy or Francis?
Sorry, got caught on mute. I wouldn't really be able to address the emergent contaminant without the assistance of
Right, but the cost effectiveness or the
cost effective, right? So just the efficiency of the waste stream is expensive to dispose of. There's actual mobilization and trucking cost, and then the cost to dispose of the brine solution, but also, you know, the O&M cost of operators and just the process of what it takes for staffing to utilize the trucking and mobilization. So all of that adds up to be the most expensive part of the ion exchange. In addition, the regenerate, the salt that comes in and turning that into a brine solution for the regeneration to reduce that. Kathy brought up some numbers, and it was substantial savings. So that's how the savings would be achieved.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So Kathy or Francis, do you want to talk about the residuals that are in this product, such as drug remnants and things like that?
I'll take a stab at that, and then Francis can jump in and correct me if I've misstated here. But we're not actually talking. You know, I know we brought up the sewage and the septic tanks and stuff, but we're really not talking in this case about using something that's, you know, it's not like a reuse program at all. So right now you already have groundwater. So it's groundwater that has been filtered, the bacteria and you know, hopefully a lot of those organics that we're talking about, the drugs do kind of filter out of the water, but the nitrate is an inorganic, and so it doesn't break down and it doesn't get destroyed in that groundwater. So it's really just a matter of trying to extract that one ion using the ion exchange resin and concentrating that up for a fertilizer. Now, a big part of what they're doing and what our program is with the Cal Poly SLOW team is to make sure that that fertilizer isn't going to have that kind of stuff or other perhaps, you know, bad actor anions that wouldn't be good for a crop. So that is certainly something that we are studying. Francis, do you want to add to that?
I think you covered it quite well. We really are thinking of drinking water as such and not septic, but the septic issue is more complex. If you had to treat the septic for removal of nitrate, I suspect that if it contained these drugs, that the process for nitrate removal would not touch it as such. But as you quite rightly said, the discussion we started with was for drinking water, and that's really where I think the most need is right now, from what I can see.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Kathy and Francis, for a very informative presentation and discussion. So we look forward to further communications in the
Thank you.
future. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. I guess we'll go ahead and drop off.
Yep.
Yep, you can leave. You don't have to drop, you can leave.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, Mark.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you too, Mark. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to item number 5, which is the consent agenda, which consists of 3 items: the minutes, the budget update invoice register for 2020 and 2021. Does anybody want to pull one of those items?
This is Charlie at S&T. I I had to leave the meeting at 2 p.m., so I would have to abstain from the meeting minutes portion of that. And I have a question about the 2020 budget update. And I think in order to ask that question, I'd have to ask to remove that, I believe.
Oh, you can ask a question. We just can't have a discussion. If you want to ask a question, that's fine.
Okay, when you're ready, I'll ask the question.
Go ahead.
Okay, I see that on page 7 of the agenda package, we continue to have what I thought was just a misprint, 2020 preliminary budget. It says attachment 1, cost summary, January 2020 to current date for the calendar year 2020 preliminary budget. Are we still approving spending for the 2020 budget? Why is this? Why are we continuing to have this in our budget presentation?
Dan, could you
Yep.
answer that question?
Yeah, I
Again,
can
not
answer
having a
that.
substantive discussion, it's just the answering a question.
Yeah, the preliminary is a typo, and that should be removed. The reason that we're showing the 2020 budget, this is really envisioned to be the final costs associated with the BMC services provided in the year 2020. So there are, a number of invoices that lag a little bit after the calendar year. And so we wanted to show, the final results of those invoices relative to the budget that the BMC had approved for the calendar year 2020. And so this is really just sort of the final accounting for 2020. And then moving forward, we will really just be showing and focusing on progress and spending relative to the budget that was approved for 2021.
So Charlie, does that answer your question, or do you want to pull the item for discussion?
I think we should pull that item.
Okay, all right. So then, anybody else want to pull anything? All right, so then we'll take public comment on the minutes and the 2021 budget update.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I wanted to appreciate the extended minutes. I think that's an adequate response to our request to make them a little bit more understandable. So that's a good thing. I guess I had questions about the budget. I am a little confused about video production services because they continue to be charged like November, September, December to AGP. Is it true that we're having to spend the same amount, $800, $775, $725 for meetings that we have done online since the COVID? That just seemed like we shouldn't be having to pay for that. I guess that's my main question about what I saw. The monthly meeting administration is also very high, but just curious if there's any explanation for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy.
There's no other public comment at this time.
All right, would you like to answer that question, Dan, or whoever?
Yeah, I can address that question. Thank you, Charles Hilsky. First off, yes, the new minutes, they represent a bit of a hybrid from what was before. I think early in 2020, we had talked about switching to a more streamlined minute system. There was comments at the January 2021 meeting that there was an interest in expanding that to provide additional detail about the comments that are made. And so this was our first attempt at that. I thank you, Lindy, for your appreciation of that. We're open to input on what is the balance between a full transcript of everything that's said and the time and effort that's required to develop that versus, really looking towards the recording as the record for the meeting and the minutes just being the documentation that's shared and with the BMC at future meetings. So please continue to provide input. With respect to the video production question, we still are paying AGP for their services even in COVID. However, the cost for service is greatly reduced, and I believe is about $150 per meeting, and those are costs associated with taking the recordings from the meeting and editing them and getting them posted on their site, but should be and are significantly less than the cost pre-COVID. However, just due to the invoice process, there may be some charges that lingered and may be showing up in COVID, but the cost for the COVID services should be significantly reduced. And then the final comment with respect to the monthly meeting administration, that description should likely be updated. That really represents the cost for the larger BMC facilitation. So those represent the cost for the executive director and my role in facilitating the meetings, having the staff meetings, working with staff on specific initiatives, overseeing the annual report, all the services that go along with the ED role. And so we can update that description to be more descriptive of the services that are provided.
Thank you for that clarification. And I was going to add that comment that we've been having, excuse me, a lot of staff meetings that Daniel's been coordinating with. So it's not just a BMC meeting, it's a lot of other side meetings that have been occurring. So, all right, with that then, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda items 5A and 5C, please?
Bruce, so moved.
Second, Mark.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Gibson and a second by Mr. Zimmer. Can we, I don't think we need a roll call vote. Well, let's do a roll call vote. Daniel or Laura, whoever's going to do it, please. Daniel?
Sorry, on mute. Director Cody?
I'm going to have to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting to approve the meeting minutes. After 2 p.m. So unfortunately, I'll have to abstain.
Director Gibson?
Yes.
Director Zimmer?
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky?
Yes. Okay, so with that then, we'll defer item 5B until after the executive director's report. But right now we'll move on to item number 6, which for public items, or pardon me, public comment for items not appearing on the agenda. I know that
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Lindy Owen again. I guess my public comment continues to be the inequity and what I consider basic unfairness of the private wells not contributing in any way to the basin management that we inside the prohibition zone are facing. And I hope that that can be rectified at some point. It really seems important that we know how much water is coming out of their private wells. I can give a few examples, but there's one where one property owner says he doesn't care how much, it's his water and he can use all he wants, and he certainly does. He has an oasis. So as we look at the severe drought warnings that just came out for the state of California, I think we need to buckle down again and get more serious. I noticed that our water, our average monthly use is estimated at 40 gallons per person, but you would not be able to include that person I just mentioned because they're using hundreds of gallons. So I think this needs to be addressed in the future, whether it's an ordinance that comes in and just says that they have to contribute the financial monitoring of the quantity of their water so that we can manage our basin correctly is extremely important. And this is it doesn't make sense to me that there's no contribution on their part, whereas everybody inside the prohibition not only pays to treat the water, we also pay high prices to resolve getting enough water for the existing community and possible future growth. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Lindy. So Jeff, you want to go next? Excuse me.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards. This afternoon, I'd like to raise several questions about the so-called sustainability group. They kind of poke their heads in periodically to the discussion about water in Los Osos, including the 22-page letter in your packet. Who is this masked group? They're not the Sierra Club or Surfrider membership, but it appears there maybe 5 to 10 folks from Los Osos that are essentially no growth. And if they want to correct me on that, I will stand corrected. But their goal again appears to be complete opposition to any growth at any time. And while there's not enough time to go point by point over their lengthy letter, I did want to talk about a couple examples of ideas that they've expressed. One of them relates to conservation. And this is in their letter, by the way, but they state that that the county's use of Title 19 retrofit program must immediately stop because it reduces the mitigation potential of BMC and purveyor conservation programs. Well, I follow conservation programs pretty closely, and to my knowledge, the only real operable, active, well-tracked conservation program is the county's Title 19 program. And in fact, again, I could stand corrected, but I don't think the Basin Management Committee, your committee, has an actual retrofit program. So they seem to be completely, their concerns here seem to be completely misplaced. The other thing that I noted in their letter was the idea of Broderson, and frankly, they're ready to dismiss Broderson. They want to do a study that demonstrates what we're up against if Broderson doesn't work. Well, I'd rather hear about what we can do to make it work. And of course, that involves the wastewater recycling facility, which I'll allude to later. This sustainability group, they have appealed ADUs in Los Osos to the California Coastal Commission, in spite of the fact these ADUs follow the retrofit program. Maybe that says it. I'd like to see the sustainability group focus more on real issues. The pumping of the Palisades well, cannabis, the existing many wells out in the community that need to be abandoned.
Okay, Bruce, or pardon me. Okay, Jeff.
I'll just close by saying they really need to focus on issues that make a difference. Thank you.
I'd like to just make a comment before we move on to the sustainability group. Their letter, which was attached to the staff report, I made the decision that it's going to be discussed at the staff level and agendized for discussion at a future meetings. I also would point out that the sustainability group did make a presentation at the Districts United or Utility Advisory Committee meeting, and they're going to be making a presentation tonight at the LOCAC meeting. So with that, then we'll go on to Patrick.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, and thank you, Marshall. And I won't even comment on Jeff Edwards. I would like to comment, though, on Lindy Owen's presentation, and I agree with her completely as far as getting everything metered. That is in the Basin Management Plan. It is a option that you can use. Almost 50% of our water is unmetered, so we cannot reliably depend on the statistics that we get just from the county estimating how much water private wells and agriculture is using. So I support that completely. Also, I have sent you a letter today which is a letter I found in archives, and it was comments from the Coastal Commission back in 2014, which I believe are pretty relevant today also. And I'd like to just read a paragraph out of that for you. It says, our staff, including the Commission's staff hydrologist, are supportive of the plan, and that's reflecting on the basin management plan, but would like to see the efforts go further in addressing the challenges that Los Osos faces related to seawater intrusion into the lower aquifer and degradation of the upper aquifer, primarily through nitrate contamination. Seawater intrusion must be slowed and stabilized, and done so as quickly and as possible. That's a quote that they had way back then in 2014. That's been 7 years. Our latest report that we just got from the annual report shows our seawater intrusion is almost back to the levels, or chloride levels are almost back to where they were in 2016. So nothing has really improved that much. And I believe also it probably has to do with we are just pumping too much. And that could be from unmetered wells. So I would really like you to take a look at that part also. And that's all my comment for right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other public comments?
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, so seeing that, we'll end public comment for items not on the agenda, and then we'll move on to the executive director's report.
Thank you, Marshall.
All right, I
Dan
thought I
Arnold here.
lost you there for a minute, or lost. My apologies.
No problem. Yeah, happy to provide the executive director's report. Again, we've structured it where new items and updates are underlined, and sort of older updates are not, but are still provided as we feel, and are provide a good reference for people in the community to understand the latest and be able to access the latest information on different issues impacting the Los Osos Basin. But as we walk through it, I wanted to provide an update on the status of several of the BMC initiatives on page 2 of the executive director's report. These were initiatives that were approved as part of the calendar year 2021 budget, and staff is currently working on. First, with respect to formalizing the sustainable yield, Cleith Harris is working to obtain updated production capacity information for the purveyor wells, as well as recycle water distribution information, and we'll be developing an updated estimate of sustainable yield for the end of 2020 for incorporation into the annual report, as well as has provided an estimate of the calendar year 2020 basin yield metric of 73. With respect to the lower aquifer transducer installation initiative, these transducers have been ordered and will arrive, and will be installed in the identified wells in and around the Broderson leach field to improve our understanding of the formation of the mound at Broderson. Once the Cleith Harris has obtained the necessary approvals from the well owners, and may, as described, even include installation of several of their own transducers to further improve our understanding of the basin and the formation of the Broderson mound. And then the update on the basin yield metric, this is anticipated to be a separate TM that Cleith Harris will focus on after completion of the annual report. And we'll look to further evaluate what are our options to improve our use of the metrics. It's been 5 years since the development of the basin plan. We've collected 5 years of data. We've improved our understanding of the basin. We have potentially new wells that we can utilize with specifically the lupine or Question by the Sea monitoring well. We further understand some of the challenges with some of the existing wells included in the metrics. And so I think this is really a great is an opportunity to evaluate the metrics that the BMC is utilizing and improve upon them to improve our understanding of the health of the basin. And so staff will be working on that initiative as we move forward and providing periodic updates to the BMC. And then similarly for the recycled water beneficial use evaluation, that work on that will be focused after the and initiated after the completion of the annual reports, with the draft TM anticipated in August. Moving down to the status of basin plan implementation and funding plans. This is an update. I don't think it was provided at the January BMC meeting due to my absence, but the BMC staff and BMC's party staff have formed a funding and organizational working group to identify and evaluate potential funding and organizational structures for the BMC and the implementation of the basin plan. You know, consistent with the basin plan, the working group's goal is to identify and evaluate funding mechanisms that will provide for the long-term funding of BMC administration and basin implementation, and equitably allocate costs amongst all of the basin users or pumpers of the basin's water resources. The working group initiated its efforts through review of the previously completed funding and organizational analyses that the BMC had undertaken, specifically the TOSIG report. Those of you that have been involved in the BMC likely remember the development and the findings from the TOSIG report. And we've been evaluating those elements as well as potential new funding mechanisms that may or may not be available to the BMC that have been developed since the original TOSIG report. And ultimately with the goal of coming back to the BMC with a summary of the different funding and organizational options, recommendations for the BMC to consider for moving forward with establishing funding organizational options, and or depending on what the findings of the group are, any data gaps that the BMC and the parties may have respective to the different funding and organizational options. Specifically, the need, for example, for the completion of an AB 1600 study to improve the BMC's understanding of how infrastructure could be funded through the establishment of an AB 1600 fee or an impact fee to fund projects to support additional growth. Moving down, we also have the updates on the land use planning process. As we've talked before, relative to the community plan, the Board of Supervisors approved the community plan and is currently waiting on, in my understanding, on Coastal Commission and to agendize review of the community plan. We've also been provided an update on the ADU issue that's included on page 4 of the Executive Director's report. And just the quick summary of that is there were, as I believe Patrick referenced, a number of ADU applications that were appealed to the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission determined that it would prefer to take action on the county's proposed ADU ordinance before taking action on the individual project applications, and has additionally, the commission has requested additional information from the county on the ADU ordinance, which the county is preparing and also coordinating with the Los Osos water purveyors. Moving to the wastewater project flow and connection update. We're continuing to refine how this data is obtained and presented to the BMC. What we have here is a summary of the wastewater influent to the wharf, as well as the different uses of that wastewater within the community and at the water recovery facility. This includes data from 2020. We're working on a procedure or a methodology where we can hopefully provide more up-to-date information on the different uses of the water from the Los Osos Water Recovery Facility in more real time to the BMC. But this is what we have for presentation at today's meeting. And that concludes, that concludes sort of the core elements of the executive director's report. Also included in this item and in the agenda packets is that reference letter from the Los Osos Sustainability Group. And as Marshall indicated, BMC staff has received the letter, has initiated review of the letter, and will be coming back to the BMC with a more formal presentation regarding the letter and the ability for that dialogue to move forward at a subsequent BMC meeting.
Thank you.
And then finally, I guess with respect to the executive director's report, I just also would like to provide an update on my status. I apologize for not being able to attend the January meeting. I've been dealing with some health issues, but I'm happy to report that I've received treatment and I'm on my way to hopefully a full recovery and the ability to engage consistently with the BMC and the BMC parties. And in the meantime, as part of my recovery, I can't get in a car, and so I'm supposed to be getting out and exercising. So I've taken the opportunity to explore the community of Los Osos and its water infrastructure. So you may see me out and about walking the streets, better familiarizing myself with the water infrastructure we have here in Los Osos.
Thank you, Dan. Is there any questions before we go to public comment?
This
Okay.
is Mark.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Dan, so I'm glad to hear you're on a recovery. Sorry for your health issues that you've been dealing with, but glad to hear you're doing well.
Thanks.
So regarding the yield, just kind of going through your report here, looking at the first, well, one of the, let me jump into the status of BMC initiatives, and looking at the sustainable yield, that 2760 acre feet, we revised that from the original ISJ, and I'm trying to recall why that happened, or I believe it was some work that we did, and I don't have it readily in front of me, but I know it was a revision. And then we look at the 2020 production. So in Spencer's work that he's doing right now to update the sustainable yield for the annual report, I think that's something that we need to vet. If he's going to change the sustainable yield, which will ultimately impact the basin yield metrics of that 73, that's just a significant metrics that we look at and evaluate. And so if there's going to be changes to how that number is derived, I think we need to kind of vet that out a little bit more than what I've seen so far. So I know Spencer's working on collecting those figures, but if that number is going to change, we should talk about it before it comes out in the annual report. Another comment would be on the transducers. Glad to see those going in. We're trying to help out with one of our wells on that one. the basin metric evaluation, is this part of the adaptive management or a separate process? It seems like it's related to me. I mean, it seems like it's part of it. So should be included there. You know, I think that the evaluating the basin metric is one of the key analysis that we're doing today, and really something that needs to be out in front. And then our adaptive management is a component of the evaluation. So just wanted to kind of, I know we're going to talk about that further, but just wanted to make that comment. And so maybe we talk about it a little bit in our subsequent discussions. And then just looking at, yeah, I guess that's kind of it for right now. The water conservation. So that the number of 40 gallons per capita, is that indoor use or total? It just seems a little bit lower. I thought we pushed up a little bit from there. Is that an accurate number today, or is that taken from a previous report? And so if so, we're talking about our conservation and some of the offsets proposed. You know, we are pretty hard, and I just don't know how viable the offsets would be if our demand is that low. Then the offsets, it seems like we would have to do a feasibility study to ensure that these offsets that are being proposed are viable. And that is about it for my questions. I don't know if you want to answer those. It's kind of some of those things we'll talk about later, but just as you were going through it, I made a few comments there.
Yeah, Dan, you want to answer some of those that we won't be discussing later?
Yeah. Let's let me provide a response. Yeah, agreed, Chair or Director Zimmer. The update of the basin yield metric and the basin metric evaluations obviously are critical tools for even without an update. Those are critical tools for how we manage the basin and assess the sustainability of the basin. And so, yes, I envision a very a collaborative, transparent process for how the BMC would make changes to those metrics if warranted. And how they may impact the basin yield metric and other metrics that are utilized for decisions with respect to additional extractions from the basin. So I think Cleve Harris is really just getting into the beginnings of that work, and so we don't have specifics to talk about today, but envision at future meetings that we will be coming back with much more detailed information, recommendations, opportunities for public comment and BMC member comment into any potential changes to those metrics, so that we all have an opportunity to understand and comment on how those may change in the future. The water conservation number is that has not been updated. That is a number that I believe reflects the status of 2019. Yes, I agree. It would be interesting to see how that number looks in 2020. And with respect to the feasibility of some of the offset programs that have been proposed, I think Title 19 is, I believe, what you're referring to, and some of those offset programs for ADUs and within the community plan. It's my understanding that the county and or the flood control district, I guess it's county in this case, is doing an evaluation of what to try to better estimate what the conservation potential in the basin may look like. It may be prudent for the BMC to do its own evaluation, or obviously review those results when they're available. But yeah, I would agree that it is critical to understand what is the conservation potential within the community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, Marshall, this is Bruce.
Yeah.
the conservation potential was analyzed in a tech memo that went with the community plan discussion before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And the outline of how water availability was calculated going forward, that the early stages of which all depended on the offset provisions of Title 19, was shown in the tech memo. That was shown in the tech memo that there was adequate targets for retrofit to secure the amount of water that was being envisioned in terms of the near-term future growth. You know, this all again has to be discussed with the Coastal Commission, the relationship of the water resource availability to the land use planning. I think the real issue with the conservation, according to that 2-to-1 retrofit, is the cost effectiveness of doing it. You know, if for instance, if you're changing out a 1.6 gallon per flush toilet for a 1.28, you got to change out a whole bunch of those to gain, you know, a significant amount of water savings. So it's that kind of, I think it's more on the cost effectiveness side, but the tech memo clearly showed there were available targets.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Bruce.
Bruce, is the tech memo, is it the one that we prepared, the former ED Rob Miller prepared for our group, or was it a county? Initiative?
I'm not, you know, I not having that file in front of me, Mark, I can't really say. If you want to contact my office, we can, I'm sure Blake can find that within the packet, but it would be in the packet that was submitted to the board when we took action on the community plan.
Okay, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to public comment. I see that Jeff Edwards has his hand raised.
And if you'd also like to make a public comment, raise your hand or press *9. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I did want to speak to item number 7, the ED report. I'll first start with the Basin Management Committee initiatives. And I certainly, as others have, supported the lower aquifer transducer installations. But we can put in all the transducers we want but we're not going to get any answers unless we load Broderson properly. And as you can see later in the wastewater flow, Broderson is only getting 556 acre feet, or at least did last year. We must load Broderson. Take water from Sea Pines, put it at Broderson. It couldn't be more simple. And frankly, that relates to this whole tech memo that's being prepared regarding recycled water and its beneficial use. Go to Broderson. We don't need a tech memo. Go to Broderson. Take it from Sea Pines. As far as your funding plans, the future funding and organizational structures for the BMC, I think it's kind of unnecessary. Are we going to reevaluate how to fund the administration of the Basin Management Committee? I think not. Are we going to look at Basin Plan implementation and how to fund those? Well, we don't need it. The program, number 2 program, Seawell, is being paid for by LOCSD ratepayers. They're also paying with a combination of ratepayer money and grants doing the 8th Street well. Any other projects will be paid by ratepayers. Let's not spend a lot of useless time and staff time working up a funding plan that's unnecessary. Then I'd like to go to the question of community plan. In a letter that I saw dated March 10th from the California Coastal Commission staff, they said that the community plan had not been submitted to them. This is as of March 10th. Now, they could be wrong, which wouldn't surprise me, but I'd like some confirmation that the Coastal Commission has received the community plan, and if they have any plans on when they might hear it. There's been ADUs discussed, and I will tell you that the Coastal Commission has taken jurisdiction of ADUs, and they're going to retain jurisdiction and hold the ADUs hostage until the community plan is done. not the ADU ordinance that was approved by the county. They could care less about that. They want the community plan, and they're going to hold everybody hostage until that's done. I would go to your water recycling facility data, and I would let the committee as well as your ED know that the county has a link with all current data regarding discharges or deployment of wastewater flows.
Thank you,
So
Jeff.
all you really need to do is provide a link. And Marshall, just one more quick second on the cannabis.
No,
Cannabis
Jeff,
has been
Jeff,
appealed to the
Jeff,
Board of Supervisors. That's not
Jeff.
in your DED report.
Jeff,
The cannabis grow has been appealed to the board.
Jeff, that would have been an item not on the agenda, so we're gonna move on to Keith.
All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Keith Weimer, Los Osos Sustainability Group. And I'd like to thank Marshall as well for your response to our letter and for the opportunity to speak with staff. And it sounded as though we would be scheduled for a presentation at some point in the future, and we could answer questions and explain our points. So we look forward to that. I wanted to just thank you for bringing up the basin-wide funding plan again. And we're looking forward to participating in that, and we support it. And it is about time that that happens. So everybody's participating in a solution. And I wanted to also mention, since part of the executive director's report included the nitrate review, let's see, I'm sorry. It's called the Recycled Water Beneficial Use Evaluation by Cleith Harris. That when Patrick brought up that the letter that we had seen from Daniel Robinson of the Coastal Commission back in 2014, there are a few points that they bring up there that we would request that are included in that review. One of the things that's brought up is the idea that both stormwater reuse and recycled water could be used possibly for injection into the lower aquifer. And given the problems with the deep aquifer zone E, that might be the only real solution we can find. So it'd be nice to have a cost-effective way to do that. And I'm just wondering if with the high rate of nitrate removal of the wastewater project, and I understand that nitrate levels are about 2 milligrams per liter, I don't think that would adversely impact, because I believe that, and one of the reports I saw, that the background nitrates in the lower aquifer are now getting close to 2 milligrams per liter. So anyway, maybe with minor treatment that could be used. And there are some issues that came up. Supervisor Gibson brought up the way the conservation potential is evaluated. And really, I don't have time to get into that, but we will be talking about that when we have a chance to present in the future. And basically, one of our main concerns was that a certain amount of conservation has to be left available just for emergency situations, so on, for the existing development.
Keith, you have reached your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again, Lindy Owen. I had a few thoughts. I wanted to first say I'm glad that Dan is improving and doing better, and I look forward to running into him if he ever wants to go look at some of the private well operation, their yards, etc. I'd be glad to walk there with him. As far as the ADUs and the retrofit program, I think there's got to be a way to see how much has been retrofitted in Los Osos, because that's the information the county controls. So that you could say how many houses have been retrofitted in Los Osos and then see what's left. I think there's probably not a lot. Most people have retrofitted on their own or used the program. The only control on, if we were to allow ADUs in, the only control we have of anybody's water usage is charging them for it when they go into the upper tiers because they use a lot. So we don't have any method to know whether they're conserving or reducing. We're trying to reduce use of the basin. So all of us that take our shower water out to our gardens, we're contributing, but a lot of people that have the money are not. And then I have a question too that I think is just an ongoing curiosity. The use of the recycled water, most of it goes to Broderson. Oh, I just lost my thing. But that's based on the idea that that water is going to pressure down and get into the lower aquifer. That is a 7-year guesstimate that it might work. Putting more on it could involve slides from the neighborhoods down. That's not a good thing. What about what the mandate from the Coastal Commission was to offset ag use? If the product that's coming out of the sewer plant is not adequate for that, or the cost is too high, maybe we should look at that, because if the ag people are not pulling out the water and they're using the reuse or using a blend, it's got to be more beneficial to our basin than waiting to see what happens on Broderson. And that was the mandate, that it should be used for ag. It comes with some nitrates, which is a benefit to them. I understand that Sea Pines pays $100 per acre foot of this recycled water. And I don't know what the ag users were offered in a deal, but if that could be reduced, it certainly would offset all these costs of putting more straws in the ground to try to balance the basin. And I don't understand why we're not really pushing forward with ag reuse, because that's the most logical way to stop sucking so much water out of the ground. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Patrick McGibney again with the Sustainability Group. I'd like to just comment on Mark's comment dealing with the ADUs and the offset programs. There has never been a study to really show whether the offset programs are actually saving water or not. And the figures that are being used for conservation potential, I do believe those are the ones that came from Rob Miller. And I had a conversation with Rob not too long ago, and he said that those were a rough estimate that he could come up with. I was directed to him by actually Kylie Hensley of the planning department when I was asking her about, well, how many toilets are really available out there? And she said, well, talk to Rob Miller. So he's the one that is doing that. Also, Bruce, you're correct that the county is revamping their metrics on offsets because the ones that are being used right now do not work. And you can easily see that just through simple math looking at that. So the county is redoing their metrics on how offsets should be metered or monitored on that. And that's about all I have to say right now. I do appreciate your time, and I am so glad also that our director is feeling much better and is recovering from his injuries. So thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Patrick.
There is no
Okay.
other public comment at this time.
We'll close public comment and bring it back. I don't know if anybody has any responses to those comments or questions. Dan, do you?
Yeah, lots of great comments. I think probably too many to respond to all at once at this meeting. But I can maybe pick a couple that we can respond to. The recycled water beneficial use memo is, yeah, it is. I think there's an understanding that Broderson is one of the most effective uses for that water. There are a number of other constraints and limitations, and I think what the BMC staff really envisions is that this tech memo will be a great way to document all the different constraints and opportunities to best use that water, and really provide a formal reference for the community, the purveyors, the BMC for prioritizing uses of recycled water moving forward, as well as evaluating new opportunities potentially for either leveraging existing recycled water infrastructure and or increasing the volumes of recycled water available through some, potentially creative approaches that I believe, and I forget unfortunately which caller mentioned it, but through stormwater capture and other mechanisms. The comment about the availability of the recycled water use data, it's a good comment, and we are aware of the county's posting of that data to, I believe it's the State Water Regional Board or State Water Resource Control Board's website. We're just working on the mechanisms of obtaining that data, converting it into units that are more readily accessible for the community, and then getting it into the ED's report. And so I anticipate that we will be able to provide more updated recycled water use data moving forward. Cannabis appeal to the Board of Supervisors. Yes, that I appreciate that update and that being shared with the Board of Supervisors. I was unaware of that, and so therefore it didn't make it into the Executive Director's report. And I think that's probably gonna have to be enough for now, but happy to talk with BMC members and or the speakers about other questions related to basin sustainability, and look forward to a dialogue with the Los Osos Sustainability Group as well.
Okay, thank you. I know that we were trying to keep this meeting shorter because of your post-op issues here. So with that, then we'll go ahead and move on to item 8, which is the action items. The first item we're going to
Point of
review.
order for a moment, Marshall. There was still an item withheld from the consent agenda. Are we going to take that up?
That's what I was just going to say, Chad.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
So item 8, action items. The first item that we're going to look at is item B5, which was pulled by Mr. Charlie Cody. So that's the first item. I don't know, Dan, do you have any comments you'd like to make on that, or should we have the discussion, see what Charlie's concerns or questions are?
I think it'd be helpful to understand what Director Cody's questions or concerns were before providing a response.
All right, Director Cody, you pulled the item, so would you like to raise for discussion what you'd like to discuss, please?
Yes, my question's fairly simple. I wonder if we're still approving invoices and spending for the 2020 budget year now in 2021. If we are, that seems to be sort of a violation of what I would assume are our normal rules of budgeting.
Yes, it's a good question, and this is something that we tackled, well, or we at least investigated early on in the at least my tenure with the BMC. It's a, as you know, Director Cody, it's a pretty complicated sort of budgeting and accounting process, given that we have 4 parties to the BMC, each with their own budget cycles and each with their own abilities to sort of reserve or not reserve funds for future funding cycles. It's my understanding that, or at least it's the current practice, that as invoices come in, they are approved using the appropriate approval procedures developed by the BMC in 2020, and then submitted to Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck for payment. And there isn't a mechanism currently to differentiate, whether those payments are coming from one party's calendar year, but fiscal year, or whatever year budget. And so we can track them relative to one budget or another, and that's what we're attempting to do with the cost summary table included in 5B and 5C. But Beyond that, we currently don't have a mechanism to sort of differentiate between the different budget years in terms of how the parties are paying for those costs.
Yeah, I think maybe we need to discuss this at a staff level perhaps instead of at the meeting, but that I don't understand how the water company I'm representing can plan budgeting costs for basin management spends in a system that works like this. Anyway, if there aren't any other comments, I'm satisfied simply to talk about this during a staff meeting.
I think that makes the most sense. So if there's any other comments, okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment then on this item.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, star 9. If you're on your computer, please raise your hand. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay.
Oh, somebody just popped their hand up. I'm so sorry.
Yep.
All right,
Lindy?
Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I agree with Charlie a little bit about understanding how the costs will be distributed. Again, the question of the outside the prohibition zone, the private wells don't contribute anything. We all pay the same taxes, but those of us inside the prohibition zone have much higher costs, of course, to fix the basin. I guess it is a complicated issue, and bringing in kind of a reminder that I think the 500 developable lots that were proposed were originally going to contribute to all these costs because Mr. Gibson assured us that we'd have water by then when the plant went in, and of course that didn't happen. So as far as them being developed in the future, their cost has got to reflect a lot more about how much extra we take out of the basin to provide water to them and at what cost. So I know that's a very complicated issue to figure out who contributes what fair share. But again, I would go back to I think the private wells should be metered. I'd like to know how much the ag wells are using so that you can look at the cost analysis of Broderson versus getting a affordable, decent water supply to them so that they stop pumping. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy.
There's no other comment at this time.
Okay, so can we go ahead and get a motion to approve item 5B, please?
So moved. This is Bruce.
We have a second, please.
Second, this is Mark.
And Marshall, I don't exactly understand what the recommendation here is beyond receive and file. There's no action pending on this. This is simply an informational item as far as I can see. So I don't see quite what the issue is with this. But my motion is to receive and file this.
Yeah, it's basically an update, Bruce. Does that motion meet your needs, Daniel?
Yes, it does. I just maybe one comment to make related to the comments from Director Cody as well as Lindy. The funding and organizational working group is evaluating the different funding and organizational options that would help address a number of these two issues that have been raised. One, given the current organizational structure of the BMC, there are very limited it limits and restricts some of the budgeting and accounting capability because the BMC as an entity doesn't exist such that it can have its own bank account, it can have its own funds as currently structured. And so that's obviously why discussions of a JPA and other governance structures have been raised to improve the revenue, well, at least the accounting and potential revenue generating capability. And then also to response to the Lindy's comment about all basin pumpers, that is something that's being evaluated when we're looking at the different funding mechanisms. Some of the mechanisms, specifically the one we have right now, which basically funds BMC administration as well as monitoring and annual report activities and all the initiatives really off of rates from the water users. However, there are other funding mechanisms out there that could expand who contributes to the funding for the BMC and the basin management. So just to say that we're evaluating options to help address or at least better understand and hopefully address some of these concerns.
Okay, so we have a motion to receive and file 5B. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, can we take a vote here, please, Dan?
Director Cody,
Yes, receive and file.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky.
Yes. Okay, so we'll move on to action item 8A, which is to review the preliminary annual report findings. The recommendation is to receive an update on the preliminary findings from 2020 annual report and provide input to staff on future direction. So Daniel?
Yeah, so in your agenda packet, similar to what we've done in previous years, we have a preview of some of the preliminary findings that will be included in the 2020 annual report. This preview is provided by Cleatheris geologists and is really just an early look at some of the information that the BMC collects as part of its monitoring program and the development of the annual report and presentation of that information in advance of the draft annual report for consideration and discussion. I know there's typically a lot of interest in, what are the latest results, what are the trends within production within the basin, what are the latest metrics, and how do they relate relative to the goals. And so we wanted to make this information available to the BMC for review and discussion. So just jumping into it, the first page includes tables of municipal production, tables of estimated total basin production, and then third table summarizing the yields relative or the metric values relative to the basin plan goals. Looking at the first table, we can see that municipal production did increase, and we're confident of that because that is all metered production in 2020 by about, or 74 acre feet in 2020. Additionally, our estimates of total basin production increased in 2020 relative to 2019 by about 110 acre feet. Probably 70% or so of that associated with increased purveyor production, but there's also an estimated increase in community as well as agricultural production. And then the basin yield metric is the draft values for 2020 are 73. Which is below the goal of 80 or less. The water level metric is 1.8, which is below the goal of 8 feet. Unfortunately, with respect to the water level metric, below is not a positive outcome. We would want to be higher than 8 feet. And then the chloride metric is higher than, or the values is higher than the metric goal of 100 with a value of 205. And then the nitrate metric is pending as we are awaiting results from other monitoring reports to be available to inform that metric. Moving to the next page, and yes, thank you, Laura, for showing this to the group. This is very helpful. The recycled water use summary. We have a table that shows the actual deliveries of recycled water in 2020 compared to the planned deliveries of recycled water in the basin plan. And so what we show in this table is that the Broderson deliveries are in the range of the planned or envisioned deliveries in the basin plan. However, many of the other deliveries are either non-existent or below sort of the planned deliveries, with Bay Ridge being below, and then currently no deliveries for urban reuse, the Memorial Park, or ag reuse. Sea Pines Golf Course is receiving slightly or 27 acre feet over the planned deliveries from the basin plan. The other thing to note here is if you look at the totals, the actual volumes of recycled water are significantly lower than the planned volumes of recycled water envisioned in the basin plan by 250 acre feet per year, which I think is a testament to the conservation efforts of the community, and that is definitely valuable. But you know, also conversely, unfortunately, we have less recycled water to put to beneficial use and offset other pumping. And then the final component of the preview is the graphs of the chloride and water level metrics. We have the graph here that shows the chloride metric in red and the water level metric in blue. We can see, starting with the water level metric, it's been relatively stable for the last 3 years, around 2 feet or 1.8 feet as it sits currently. However, we are seeing an increase in the chloride metric in 2020, increasing from about 180 to 200, well, 205 specifically. And that is associated with, unfortunately, increased chloride levels that we have observed in the monitoring wells that are included in the chloride metric. As discussed earlier, this year, there's an initiative for BMC staff and the BMC, obviously, to evaluate any potential changes or modifications that may want to be made to these metrics to allow us to better leverage our improved understanding, the new wells that are available, and the other reasons that I described previously. There is one slide that I want to show. And so, Laura, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hold on, I'm a little rusty. Can everyone see that?
Mhm.
It's a similar, it's the chloride and water level metric. But what's included here is two values in dashed lines. And this is something that I had requested from Cleith Harris geologists. And what it is showing here is it's showing the solid lines are the historic data of the metric, as we just saw on the other slide. And the dashed lines show the values that were estimated as part of the basin plan, and sort of their best estimates of how these metrics would transpire, or the values we would see for these metrics moving out in time, you know, using predictive groundwater model scenarios. And so I think what's interesting here, and you know what Spencer has described to me, and I'm sure others, is that it was originally envisioned that the chloride metric would rise from 2015 on, as the mound at Broderson took 5 to 7 years to develop. At that, then as that mound's developed, then the chloride metric would start to decline, you know, as we approach, I guess, 2030, as that mound, you know, builds and increases the hydraulic pressure and helps push that intruding seawater out to the ocean. Additionally, it was envisioned back previously that the water level metric would take some time to rise to the target of 8 feet, and you know, may not reach that target until, or at least the predictions look like 2025. I just wanted to share this with the BMC as just additional context to sort of how these metrics are envisioned to play out relative to the basin plan. Obviously, things don't always exactly go according to plan. And I think there are opportunities to improve these metrics, as we described earlier. You know, there are limitations with these metrics. We've only got so many holes in the ground that we can monitor and understand, and at least get an assessment for what's occurring in the aquifers. And so we need to leverage that data to the best that we can. And so as described previously, we've got an opportunity to update those metrics. And but I just wanted to share this document as it was, at least for me, was informative for how those metrics are progressing relative to the anticipated values in the basin plan.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Do we have any questions before we go to public comment? Okay, let's go to public comment then.
Marshall, I have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay, Mark, go ahead.
So regarding the tables, thank you, Dan. This is a great report and overview of what we're looking at here. But jumping into the basin yield metrics, we talked about it a little bit and how important these metrics are in the decision-making process. But specifically the basin yield metrics, we were talking about changing the groundwater production values in our executive director report, which directly correlates to the basin yield metrics. So, you know, this is kind of what I'm referring to when I say we need to use caution when we make changes, and especially if decisions are being made on these metrics today. And so the sustainable yield that's a component of the yield metrics, that's already changed once, and it's changed from the original 2450 that we originally started with, but we've done some projects and wells, new well, program C well, I believe nitrate removal has changed the sustainable yield number that we use. So we made a change there. And that change is really the only reason why we're at 73 below the 80. I might be misinterpreting this, but this is my assumption of what I've dove into. So making changes impacts the metrics that we look at. So by changing the basin yield or the sustainable yield, we've changed the basin yield metrics. We're looking at making an additional change that could change the basin yield metrics. I would exercise caution and evaluation before we make any more changes, because if we start changing the data that we're using in these metrics, the analysis is really not going to be substantiated. So really want to look at that and point that out. You know, as we look at our matrix evaluation, I think it's critical that we have, you know, as we went through in our executive director report, you and the staff, and really what the Basin Management Committee agreed to was to look at the projects, the metrics, and the funding mechanism are three really key components. They're in the work right now. We're working on that. Before we go and make additional changes, we should evaluate the validity of what we're looking at today. And so really that's my comment overall on the metrics. You know, the graph and the additional graph of projection, I think that helps us understand that it's going to take some time to, you know, projects and improvements and actions we take are not going to happen overnight. I mean, we're not going to see the results overnight. We got to let it take its process in order to see the results. So I appreciate that extra slide there. But basically that's my comment. So if I'm wrong on assuming the basin yield metrics and how it's calculation in the changes, please let me know, because I'd hate to misstate that. It's just such an important factor.
All right, thank you, Mark. Dan, would you like to respond to some of those, please?
Yes, yeah, and great comments, Director Zimmer. I believe you are correct. I believe that there have been updates to the sort of basin yield number that's a component of the basin yield metric, which is a ratio of the sort of, I don't want to mess up the terminology, but the sort of sustainable yield of the basin based on best available estimates and the amount of production that occurred within this calendar year. And it's my understanding that Cleith Harris and staff have updated that number to account for completion of different basin plan program components, as well as other changes that have occurred since 2015. And I don't necessarily have a documentation of the full history at the top of my head, but I'm sure that's something that we could provide as sort of the history of that. One of the things that the stipulated judgment requires, I believe, 5 years after the approval of the basin plan, was to develop formalized updated estimates of sustainable yield. And that was one of the reasons why we included it in the initiatives for the BMC, is to reevaluate the sustainable yield numbers for the basin in the calendar year 2021 budget, as it's a requirement of, and I either stipulated judgment of the basin plan, I don't recall exactly which, but for the BMC to evaluate moving forward. It is critical, as you identify, Director Zimmer, these are numbers that are being used to assess the health of the basin and the potential for the basin to accommodate additional pumping. And so I agree with you that evaluations and updates to this need to be done with a comprehensive review and involvement of the BMC party staff and the BMC. And also, this is why Cleith Harris is going through a more robust evaluation and has requested production information from the purveyors, as that is one component of the calculations and the methodology for estimating the basin's sustainable yield. And so I think we are looking at a more robust update to that number with this calendar year. And then so the other thing that I would add, and it's part of our next item, is we're also looking to add develop a more formal procedure for how updates to the basin plan and basin plan components, like the sustainable yield, are developed and approved by the Basin Management Committee. This, if approved, the next item would establish a formal procedure that would allow the BMC to review potential changes to the basin plan or adaptive management or other provisions, and then formally approve those changes for inclusion in the annual report moving forward.
Okay. But as far as the work that you mentioned that Cleith Harris is looking at, that's not going to be used in the 2020 annual report. We're looking at reviewing the process and the evaluation this year for updating the 2021 annual report. Is that correct?
My understanding is that Cleith Harris was looking to update the sustainable yield estimates for year 2020 and incorporate it into the annual report. And it's my understanding that is consistent with what has occurred in previous years, and how the changes that you referenced to the basin yield are developed for use in the basin yield metric. The other basin and the more comprehensive basin metric update, which includes the water level metric, the chloride metric, and the review of the basin yield metric as well, the nitrate metric, that would be included in the 2020 2021 annual report.
Mhm. So I don't know if the Basin Management Committee has actually reviewed these changes of how the basin yield metric is going to be revised in the 2020 annual report. That's part of my concern.
Yeah, and I think that is something that, you know, we're getting comments on that today. We'll have a further opportunity to really review it in more detail when we bring the draft annual report, because that'll include additional documentation for any changes, you know, that were made to the sustainable yield estimate, and an opportunity, a further opportunity for the BMC and the public to comment on any changes to the sustainable yield estimates that become part of the sustainable yield metric.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to public comment then. Lindy's our first one up.
I have
Oh,
a
Charlie, sorry, Charlie, I saw you muted, so I figured you didn't have anything to say.
No, I just got in. So I don't feel completely comfortable with getting a 400-page draft of the annual report and have something like 30 days to review that, when that report also includes changes to the methodology that would be reviewed. I'm just going to say that. I don't expect that there's any answer to that, my concerns. I had another comment here about something much more minor than that. I'm going to let that go, but I'd just like to express my discomfort with, one is the small amount of time we have to review such a large and important document, and then the complication of that review, or that review complicated by changes in methodology that aren't completely transparent. I'm just very concerned about that.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Dan, do you have any comments to that, or?
Could
Yes.
Could I first jump in, Marshall? I'm sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. This is Bruce. You know, if you look at the annual reports, that it is detailed how the sustainable yield of the basin is calculated, and it references Cleve Harris tech memos and other data. And you know, it may be good to compile a history of that, but it's real. You know, it's real clear how they go about estimating sustainable yield using the steady state model that they have. I don't think there's any mystery to that. Again, if you know, if Spencer or Dan could bring forward an item at our next meeting to detail that, I don't think it would take long to make it clear how this happens. Yes, it's in a technical report, but that's probably where it should be, and we can certainly highlight it as necessary. I'd be interested in Dan's response to that.
Dan, do you want to respond to those two comments, please?
Yes, I would. So one thing I want to respond, and I apologize if I gave the incorrect information. So the basin yield, the sustainable yield for the basin of 2,760, which was what was used in the development of the basin yield metric for 2020, is the same sustainable yield number that was developed back in 2017. So I apologize if I gave the perception or the incorrect perception that there has been an update to the sustainable yield number that was included in the basin yield metric calculation. So we're still using a sustainable yield number that was developed 4 years ago at this point, that reflected the completion of the basin program infrastructure at that time. That number it has not been updated, and is not the reason for the change in the basin yield metric from 2020 to 2019. That change, I believe, is associated with the change in the pumping, which is the other component of the basin yield metric. And I think it would be beneficial to provide an update to the BMC, especially if we are actually this year considering changing the sustainable yield number. obviously, when we bring that potential change to the BMC, we will include a robust description of the methodology that's utilized to make that change. Or sorry, how the sustainable yield estimate is calculated and any proposed changes to that.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for the clarification. Anybody else? Okay, now we'll go to public comment. Laura, Lindy's the first one up there.
All right, and for anybody else wanting to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Lindy, you're able to speak.
Thank you. I guess I wanted to agree with the idea of being very cautious with how we go forward, and especially with the sustainable yield. I'm looking at the draft with municipal groundwater production 2013 to 20, and then comparing it with the basin groundwater production 2013 to 20. And it looks like, if you look at the second table, it looks like the difference of savings is a little close to 500 acre feet from 2013 total, from 2013 to 2020. But the only ones who really substantially saved water apparently are the purveyors. You look at the domestic, that has gone up. You look at the agriculture, that has supposedly gone down, but I don't know how they measure agriculture since there's no quantity metering. And then I don't think that the second graph that Dan showed us with everything leveling off at some point, isn't that a little bit pie in the sky? Because we saw the huge dip between 2015. It dropped way down, the salt chloride composite, and then now it's gone way back up. I don't like to see those kinds of drafts where it just says it'll never change once we get to 2015, 2025 or 2030. That's a long ways ahead. We still have a major drought going on. So I guess, and I just wanted to make a point that is a little bothersome to me, is that a person who went to the county and was interested in purchasing an empty lot asked about the development potential, and they were assured that in 7 years they would be able to develop. So if we've got the county pushing that kind of information out on unsuspecting property buyers looking to buy to build something in the future, we need to say in 7 years, we're going to have permits going in. So that will affect that second graph. Yeah, I think the sustainability group and I feel very cautious about how much water we're going to be able to provide and save. And we should be saving water, not developing more properties and putting more straws in until we actually know where we're getting it from. It is a basin that's not receiving a whole lot of
Lindy, you've hit your 3 minutes.
because of the drought condition. Thank you.
All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I have some comments on that point, but first I wanted to point out that I think I've recognized that there is an error in the draft preliminary report. And that is that I believe that the metric value for chlorides is underestimated. The water quality table for 2020 showed that the Rosina well had a value of 310 milligrams per liter, but the table also showed that the nitrates at that time were 4.6 milligrams per liter, which indicates wellbore leakage. If you go back to the 2018 annual report, Appendix J, they adjusted that appendix adjusted the values of the chloride levels at LA10, the Rosina well, due to wellbore leakage. They adjusted them up because that report points out that the background level of nitrates is 2 milligrams per liter, and anything above that would be wellbore leakage. So what I did is to look at how they did that, and they did that by looking back at a number of just samplings during the year, and they picked a chloride level that corresponded with a 2 milligram per liter nitrate level. I didn't have that information for 2020, so I just estimated what the factor would be, how much they increased the nitrate level at LA10 as a result of wellbore leakage. And I came out with a factor of 1.35. And when you multiply the 3.10 value for 2020 at the Rosina well by 1.35, you get 4.18. And so 418 milligrams per liter. And then when that's double weighted and then figured into the metric, you get a metric value of 250 rather than 210. And that would actually put the level of chlorides or the metric value off that chart. And so I think until this issue is resolved, that this should be put on hold, and that should be reevaluated for what it should be with that factor figured in. And then secondly, there was I think I might be running out of time here, so I'm going to just shift to you know, it is a concern for us that the way that the sustainable yield is calculated and the way the yield metric is calculated. I mean, both the sustainable yield, which is based on the modeling, and
Keith,
also,
I'm sorry, you've reached your 3 minutes.
if I could have a little extra time, I could explain that.
Director Oholsky?
Sorry, Keith, we're running way late today, but you can submit comments in writing if you would like.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Dan, would you put your graph back up there, please, on the chlorides and the water levels?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. And could you make that also available?
Yep. Yeah, that just came out. Oh, sorry, here, let me find it again.
I don't know, between Patrick and Daniel, we got the two different pictures there.
There it is. You should be able to see it now.
Yep,
Okay,
there it
thank you.
is. Thank you. We got it, Dan.
Thank you. So obviously looking at this, our metrics have not proven to be correct in the slightest, especially when it deals with water levels. Now, you're saying that the metric for the chloride actually was supposed to go up, and within 7 to 10 years, you were saying it would then start dropping down. Well, we've already been into this 6 years now, and we're pretty stationary, working our way up still. In all the TMs that have been out, pretty much a lot of them have stated in there that it could take years, some of them saying 10 to 15 years before we know whether the metrics are working at all. So I would just go with what Mark has been saying as far as caution. We need to take the precautionary approach. And until we know whether our metrics actually do work and whether we are dropping our chlorides and reversing seawater intrusion, we should not have any more growth over the basin itself. And that it would include also any cannabis growth, which is any water use over our basin that could deplete our aquifer any more than it already is. So let's take the precautionary report approach on that. I'd like to also look at the graph that you have on here dealing with the nitrates. And you say that the nitrates are pending. You don't give an amount there. Well, you had 5 wells that you took the nitrates looking at, and those 5 wells, 4 of them were all up into the 20s, 22, 3, 4, that about. You had 1 well that was down to 2, and that was the well that was the, I think it was the 10. That gets flushed out anyway. So that's why the metric level on that was really low. So why do we have a pending metric on here? What are you waiting for until you get an account on that? And the last thing also is agriculture on here. I agree with Lindy Owen. 650, this has been the hottest year on record, and it's also been one of the driest years on record. You would be using a lot more water in agriculture than you would on other years. So why this is down as far as what they've used is really questionable. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you're able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Edwards, and I wanted to speak to this preliminary look at the 2020 annual monitoring report. I'll reserve most of my comments until the metrics, regarding the metrics, until some of the data has been finalized. But in reviewing the basin management plan and the ISJ for today's meeting, I ran across a couple items that I thought were of particular interest, and I would hope that that this committee would include them in the 2020 monitoring report to the extent that they're not covered, and I'm pretty sure they're not. The first item is about a well abandonment program. You might know that there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of older, mostly unused water supply wells inside this community. Many of them are buried. Most people are not even aware they're present, but I can tell you they're there. And you've talked about well borage leakage. This is a formula for that. So I would ask your committee to again make a well abandonment program part of your 2020 annual monitoring report. And then I'd ask you to direct your staff to bring back a program, a real program that could address these many wells that are out there. And certainly they're old and subject to contamination. The obvious question is money. And if there's part of this program, if you could include some kind of offset to help defray expenses to abandon all these wells, I think it'd be a huge contribution to water quality in our basin. The other thing in reviewing the relevant documents is the notion of system or purveyor interconnectedness. And there's been talk about interties between the three purveyors, and there may be emergency interties now, but I would suggest and submit to your committee that you make this a priority. Certainly the basin management plan suggested it's a priority. Make it a priority that the three purveyors plan, fund, and complete the construction of real interties, not just emergency interties, but ones where you can flip a switch and transfer water to from one purveyor to another. I think it'd be hugely important in terms of management. So I will leave you with that. Thank you and good day. I'll reserve additional comments till the next item.
Thank you.
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, so I'll bring it back to the committee.
Marshall, this is Bruce, if I could. I think I appreciate staff's giving us the update on it. And as I look at the discussion, listen to the discussion that we're dealing with here, it reinforces my opinion that we really need to move to a transient model for this basin. Because if you look at what we're trying to deal with, it's a bit of apples and oranges. On the one hand, sustainable yield is a steady state concept, averages over long periods of time, and we're comparing, or we're evaluating our performance in this basin on year-to-year metrics. And there are, a couple of issues of that is that we have to do some work to actually translate the time projections of these metrics according to management actions that we take in ways that I think make it a bit cumbersome for us. So again, I would hope that my purveyor colleagues will agree with me to prioritize the institution of a transient model. It's going to make our management operations a whole lot easier and more certain. And that's not, should emphasize, that's not the issue for the next item, which I think we can dispense of fairly quickly. In terms of the item is agendized to give staff some direction on, further preparation of the annual report. And I would offer two bits of direction on that. One, I think, is as we display the measured metrics, we should include those dashed lines, those projections, which wherever at any point our best estimate of future responses to the basin, to management actions we've already taken, we should be evaluating these data according to what we were expecting. That's the essence of adaptive management, is to see under what point we need to change. And the second is, I think we absolutely need to get the evaluation of the composition of each metric nailed down. Discussed this a little bit at the last meeting. The chloride metric is unreasonably dependent on the behavior of one well. And for whatever reason, that well has shown some significant gyrations in recent years that are not consistent with the other wells that make up the metric. But that one that the metric is reflecting the double weighting of an individual well. So I think we need to get that squared around, and we need to have a discussion of that. And I would assume, or I would certainly hope, that by the time we publish the annual report, we have a better handle on the individual compositions of these metrics. Thanks, that's it.
Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else? Okay, I think you had.
Marshall, if you don't mind to respond, there was the one question about the pending nitrate metric. I just wanted to respond to that quickly, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Yeah, where the pending refers just to the unavailability of the complete data set, is my understanding. Some of the values for the nitrate metric come from a monitoring report, I believe, that's developed for the operation of the water recycling facility, and that report just was not available at the time of the preparation of these updated metrics.
Okay, thank you. So I think we had good discussion and provided input to staff on future direction. So unless there's anything else, we'll move on to 8B. All right, we'll move on to 8B, formalize the process for implementation of the adaptive management plan. So Daniel, would you like to give that report? I would like to point one thing out for everybody's edification, and if any of the attorneys on board want to talk about this. I would believe under section 7.5 of our bylaws that this is going to require a unanimous vote, since in my opinion, it's authorizing or implementing a material change to the basin plan. So I just wanted to lay that out in the front as my interpretation of the vote that would be required for this. Okay, Daniel.
Thank you, Marshall. Yes, so what we have included in the agenda packet today is a draft resolution for the BMC to consider. And what this resolution does is it really lays out a formal approach to implementing the adaptive management plan and or making changes to the basin plan. And so the basin plan currently provides a generalized description of how adaptive management can be utilized to assure all objectives of the groundwater basin are met. But what it doesn't do is outline a specific process for how the BMC would make changes to the basin plan, programs, or strategies set forth in the basin plan. And so in order to provide some additional structure and to formalize the process, the BMC staff worked together to develop the following procedure, and which is included in the resolution. The proposed process would be for the BMC to direct the executive director, contracting hydrogeologist, or other consultant to perform an evaluation of a potential basin plan adaptive management modification to a basin plan program or strategy as part of an appropriately described item on the BMC agenda. The BMC staff would then perform the requested evaluation and prepare an adaptive management modification recommendation for the BMC review and potential approval. The BMC would then review and adopt, if approved, the adaptive management modification. And then the status of the basin plan infrastructure projects and basin plan description in the annual report would be modified to reflect the approved adaptive management modification. The process is described in more detail in the resolution, and would be beneficial for the following reasons. One, it formalizes existing procedures. There have been adaptive management changes that have been made that have, it's, for example, sort of changes to the need for a third, the identified need for a third program seawell was deferred through adaptive management. And so this would be a process to formalize those procedures. And then also it just provides more definition and to better clarify how, the BMC's adaptive management and modifications and status of the basin plan interacts with other land use planning documents. For example, the Los Osos community plan includes a framework for potential new development that ties the timing for new development to completion or key basin plan program implementation milestones. And so this, by establishing a more formalized process, it would be much more clear when those milestones have been and reached and as identified by the BMC. And so before we take discussion on this item, I do want to add that staff did identify some potential modifications to the resolution, relatively minor modifications, but I would like to share my screen so I can show those modifications to the BMC, as it is staff's recommendation that the BMC review and approve the modified resolution, not the resolution that is included in the agenda packet. And so what I'm showing here, and hopefully, can you see the resolution?
Yes.
Is and I can zoom in, it's basically, it's modifications to the second page, sections 2 and sections 3, which I'll zoom in here. And the modification is to section 2 is that, and I'll just start with the beginning of the sentence, the written recommendation or accompanying staff report shall address whether the modifications require an amendment to the basin plan. And then there's an addition or further environmental review. And then also a modification to the next sentence where it says all required amendments to the basin plan shall be approved and removed, adopted by the Basin Management Committee. So it shall be approved consistent with the requirements set forth in the stipulated judgment and applicable laws. And then there's a modification to step 3. Any modifications to the basin plan program, strategy, metric, or other elements set forth in the basin plan, as well as any related approved amendment, so adding the word approved to the basin plan itself, and then deleting approved by the BMC, shall be documented in the next annual report. And so the recommendation is to review and consider for approval the revised resolution. I'm sorry for giving everybody a headache there. I do want to point out, just a point of clarification, that it is my understanding that this is just consideration and approval of a process, not any changes to the basin plan or the basin plan programs, nor is it sort of ratifying or approving any previous changes that the BMC made to the basin plan or basin plan programs through adaptive management. If the BMC would be interested in making those previous modifications to the basin plan and basin plan programs, those modifications would need to go through this process for formal approval before they would be formally updated in the annual report.
Does anybody have any questions or comments before we go to public comments?
Yes, I have a question, Charlie from S&T. It's not clear to me after studying this resolution that we're talking about the potential or possibility that the basin management plan document actually gets revised as a part of this. Is it just simply obvious that that happens, or are we planning to only record these changes in annual reports while leaving the basin management plan document to become something of an obsolete document?
That is a good question, Charlie. And I'd like to, if we could, pull in some legal counsel representatives to help in this discussion as this gets a
No,
little
I
bit
would
out of-
agree because I think this is a modification to the plan.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if I could, this is Bruce. I'm going to have to leave for a hard stop at 3:30. If Laura could promote Kate Ballantyne, who I believe is in the attendees list as KEB, to to take over as my alternate, I'd appreciate that. I'll leave you with my opinion that we should approve it as modified. Thanks very much.
Okay, all right, well, we have Kate in now.
And Laura, maybe while you're at that, if you could approve Erica Stuckey and I believe Jenna Akos. Or yeah, add them to the panelists.
Jenna's there and Erica's there, yeah, they're both there.
I can start if you like, or Jenna, would you like to chime in?
Erica, why don't you go first? You did the first cut at doing this, and then I'll jump in.
Great. So, it was not the intent, and I don't think my position is this resolution does not amend the basin plan. The purpose of the resolution is actually to just provide some detail to the adaptive management plan process that's set forth in the existing basin plan. On the contrary, it's actually to set forth the process by which, if a basin plan amendment were required in order to implement a particular proposal under the adaptive management plan, when that would be. So, and to answer Charlie's question, it would be on a case-by-case basis. I think that's part of the process that would happen. That's what's outlined in section 2. Some adaptive management actions may not require an amendment to the basin plan, and some may. And so the very purpose of this resolution is to actually increase documentation, increase transparency, make sure that all of those decisions are being made and those that analysis is taking place with respect to implementation of the adaptive management program.
Thank you, Erica. Jenna, do you have anything to add to that at this point?
No, I would just like to echo that, yes, based on my review of the stipulated judgment as well as the basin plan, it is just sort of restating and collecting all of these different requirements and putting them into one document and formalizing the process.
So you're both of you are just saying that this is just basically formalizing the process and bringing all those pieces together so we have an identifiable process. But any subsequent changes to the stipulated judgment or the basin plan, those would occur subsequent to this reorganization or restructuring. So this is not making a material change to the basin plan.
Correct. I think there's the possibility that If a modification were requested by the, through steps 1 and 2 were requested by the BMC, if that modification were considered a substantive or substantial change to the basin plan, that's where the unanimous approval requirement is triggered. That's my understanding. But the process before us right now, or the consideration before us right now, is just whether or not the basin management committee wants to formalize this procedure and paper it, as Erica said. I will say that, and I don't want to take Mark's thunder from him, but I will say that Golden State and Mark, we do have some comments on one of the steps that we are a little bit uncomfortable with some of that language. So I'll leave that to Mark too.
Okay, well, thank you, Jenna. All right, well, I think we're done with the legal discussion, at least for now. So let's go to the commissioners. Mark, would you like to start, since Bruce already expressed his opinion, he's gone, and then KEB is standing in for Bruce now?
Jenna was doing such a good job, she could have continued on. And
she said she didn't want to steal your thunder.
I don't really want this kind of thunder. So anyway, yeah, I guess my basic question, what is the impetus behind this today? Why is this before us right now? I understand that we want to streamline procedures for elements of the basin plan when they come before us. But right now, what we've agreed as the Basin Management Committee is really look at project initiatives, metric evaluation, funding mechanism. I think that's what we should be focused on and really evaluating, not the process of once we determine a decision is made that we need to make a change, we formalize it so we can streamline that and make it more efficient. We don't even know what these changes are. I guess, how is that different than what we have today? Why is this before us right now in this order? And then what does this give us that we don't have today? Because we can make changes. We've done it before. Were the changes that we made before not appropriate and in line with the ISJ? Or, I don't see those as being really a bogged down process. We did what this says to do. We brought it before the basin. We talked about it, we agreed on it, and we implemented those changes. That to me doesn't seem like that was a bogged down process that needs efficiency. So therefore, I just question even why are we putting this in place today, right now? What is the problem? What are we correcting? And then there are a couple more details of what this is actually saying, but I'll just leave it at that for right now. I guess I'd like to hear, we heard from Bruce, but is that, I just don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. You stole my thunder because I'm really not comfortable with this at this point. So, and I think I made that clear from my previous discussions, but I just think that we have bigger priorities to face right now, as Mark mentioned, and I think this is something that we could defer and might even be better to have when we have in-person meetings coming back, probably in 3 or 4 months, to discuss this a little further at that point. So I agree with Mark. I'm just not comfortable with this at this point in time. So I don't know, Charlie, you want to add anything to that before we go to public comment or comments back by Dan?
Yes, I think that, I don't know if I don't want to take credit for this, but I think this may have an origin in a comment or request I made about the nature of the basin management plan. And is it a living document? I asked at one of these meetings, is it something that we could amend or revise? This resolution really addresses my questions about that. And I think that what I understand, Marshall, that you're saying, and possibly Ms. Akos also agreed, that these powers already exist with the Basin Management Committee without this resolution. And if they did, that's great. And perhaps it doesn't need to be written down. However, having a plan and an understanding, a resolution like this does create an understanding and a clear methodology, and well, more so an understanding that the basin management plan is a living document that can be amended and revised. But not being a legal expert, I'll yield to you guys on that.
Well, thank you, Charlie. So yeah, like I said, I'm just not comfortable with this in its current format. And so, but anyway, Daniel or any of the attorneys want to respond before we go to public comment?
All right, I guess I'd like to respond, and then I'd like to the attorneys to correct me if I get it wrong. But my understanding of the intent for this is, again, it's just that there are processes that have and changes that have been presented to the BMC and I believe approved in the past through the adaptive management technical memorandums. This was intended to just more formalize that process because there are critical impacts to the community, or specifically the community plan references completion, and let me just use an example, and maybe that'll is my understanding is, the community plan references the completion of program A and program C as being a key milestone for the initiation of some incremental growth. And basically, right now, program C is not complete because it was envisioned to include 3 wells. One of those wells is currently in the planning and design phase, and in theory would be constructed. And the 3rd well is deferred currently, as described in the annual report and as described in the status of basin plan infrastructure project, deferred under adaptive management. And so there would be some ambiguity as to whether or not program C is deemed complete upon the completion of that 2nd program C well, which then may or may not trigger the potential for additional growth. And it was envisioned that by further formalizing this process, we would lay out how the BMC would be able to determine the completion of for example, program C with the 2nd well, or whether it was the BMC would identify that no, the 3rd well is required for the completion of program C, as an example.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Does anybody have anything else before I go to public comment here? Okay, Laura, let's go to public comment.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, *9. If you're on your computer, please raise your hand. Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jeff Edwards. And I would urge your committee to continue this matter off calendar. It was an agenda item on January 20th, and the public's had almost no involvement for these several months. And today you have the identical staff report from January 20th, and yet you have changes that have already been made to the reso, and you have perhaps more changes coming. This seems to be something that is a solution looking for a problem. I do not believe the passing of this reso gives you any additional authority or authority beyond what you have today. And to hear from your executive director that this is really being used to foreclose the idea of a number 3 program C well is ridiculous. And the connection with the community plan, there is none. Because if you know the community plan, the trigger for new development is the completion of the LOCSD program A Upper Aquifer 8th Street well and the number 2 program C well by the LOCSD. There's no reference to the number 3 program C well in the community plan, as far as I know. So this is, again, a solution looking for a problem. It's frankly, it represents more paper pushing, and I completely object to it. Moreover, if you were to consider it, I would respectfully submit that not only does it require a unanimous vote of the committee, but I would submit that it also likely requires court approval. So with all due deference to your esteemed legal counsel, I think they're way off base. And so again, I urge your committee to continue this off calendar. We have plenty of other things to do, and this is not one of them. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And wow, I think I agree with Mr. Edwards there. So I have a couple questions that I'd like to get out, and I would like answers to these. If this is adopted, which I again do not see any reason at this point why it is even up here, what it's going to accomplish, and that kind of thing, like it has already been expressed. But if it is adopted, will it have any slowing or deferring the implementation of programs for development, rather than allowing programs to be maximized now to stop seawater intrusion and provide a sustainable basin for the current population? Programs really need to be put into operation at this point, not waiting until we have a further growth coming into the area. Also, I'd like to comment on some of the ideas about what is going to trigger further growth. Well, the one thing actually that we should be looking at is condition 6 of the CDP the Coastal Commission put out, where they require conclusive evidence that the basin is sustainable before there is any further growth. So I think that's what people need to be looking at. Another question I have on here is, what would be the fiscal impact, if any? And the BMC has never implemented a contingency measure that identifies potential problems that may need to be addressed immediately. Shouldn't the contingency program be a focus rather than modifications of the adaptive management plan? And as it's been stated before in here, the basin management plan talks about the adaptive management plan. You've been using it already. You've been making changes, you voted on things. Those are all valid processes, and I don't see any reason at this point that we should be spending time working on this thing. That's all I have right now, and I would like answers to my questions at the end. Thank you.
All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Well, Patrick covered it pretty well, and I would just reinforce that programs shouldn't be reserved for future development, especially when seawater intrusion continues. We need to maximize these things and make sure it's stopped. And like Patrick says, we need to have conclusive evidence that metrics or whatever clear and physical objectives that are set eventually are being met. And it should be chloride objectives and water level objectives. They should be clear, and we should have those physical objectives out there rather than trying to meet what are basically based on the model, and that is the yield metric. The yield metric has two elements of uncertainty, and one of them is that the water use is uncertain due to 50% of it having to be estimated. And then, of course, it's compared to the sustainable yield, and the sustainable yield is an estimate. And the model has not had a uncertainty analysis done. So it's just, to reserve programs based on an estimate of a model that is not fully vetted is just not appropriate. So thank you, and I would appreciate you not passing this, not approving it.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I would have to agree with the last three speakers and actually everybody. I think this method of handling changes as they come along, and that's what this is. We're planning, and when we have to change the plans, we need to adjust. And I think the board has done a good job along with staff to help implement and get those going. So I had a question. Did the county write this resolution? I'm just very curious. I would like to know what the extra costs will be, and kind of like would like to see almost an example of, pick the example that Dan used of the Plan 3, no, Program C, sorry. And show us what that process would be, how much time would it take, who's involved, who makes the decisions. I think the formal process is totally excess, and I agree, everybody, we need to work on the basin and the community plan connection. Ultimately, the community plan cannot do any growth until we have a sustained basin, or at least enough for ourselves. So when you look at these projections on your metrics and everything looks hunky-dory way ahead, we do not know. And so the sustainability has a lot to do with how the basin plan gets modified and changed. And it should be something that's alive and able to move forward without a lot of whatever bureaucracy added in. So thank you. I hope you don't approve this. I don't think we need it. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindy.
There's no other public comment at this time.
Well, one thing I never thought I'd hear, and I think Patrick put it perfectly when he said, wow, that he was agreeing with Jeff. So, yeah, so you want to go back and, I mean, we have really two choices at this point: to defer it and deal with the questions in the long term, and as we maybe make some adaptations to this, or do you guys want to have a discussion now about it? So what do you want to do, Mark and Charlie and KEB?
Kate.
I'm sorry, I'm just going by your initials. That's the
I
way.
know, I can't change it right now.
Oh, this is Charlie from S&T. I'm not going to make a motion right now because I don't think that would be proper, but I think I'm in favor of deferring this, at least deferring it till later.
What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I think we should defer it till later, just pretty much not a date like next meeting or anything like that, but just deferring it until we come back and look at, our metrics, initiatives, and the funding mechanism, things like that, and really decide, is this something we need to implement? So I would definitely vote to defer it.
Well, yeah, while I'm saying that Charlie, again, I am still a little uncomfortable with the informal processes, some of which we have now for making some of these changes that aren't codified in the manner proposed by this resolution. So I'm a little uncomfortable both ways here.
And I agree with you, Charlie. Right now I'm more uncomfortable with proceeding forward, but I do think in the medium term here that we do need to come up with a process that we can follow. But I agree with all the speakers that spoke that I really think it's premature to do this at this point in time, that we have other priorities. So I don't know, Kate, Bruce already threw in his vote. I don't know if you want to talk again.
Yeah, well, after listening to the other directors' comments and public comment, I agree that bringing this back at a later date is a good idea. I do understand from staff's perspective, this is, just an attempt to formalize a process, establish good governance and be organized. But I see that there are a lot of concerns, so we should address those concerns and bring this item back.
Okay, well, I think we have a unanimous opinion on that. So Dan, unless you have anything to add, we'll just defer this to a later meeting after we've had a little more time to, not to a date certain, but a little more time to deal with some other priorities.
Yeah, I I believe that's appropriate. There isn't a sense of urgency on this. So we have time to
Okay.
have additional staff level and BMC discussion on this item. There really is no reason to rush this. And if there are modifications that parties want to see proposed, we should take the time to do that and improve, I think, sort of the understanding of what is trying to be achieved here. It really is just a trying to formalize a process and empower the BMC and increase transparency and develop a consistent understanding for the processes for how the basin plan and the basin plan programs can be modified. But there's no actions or modifications that are being proposed in the near term. So I would agree with the comments that we can defer this and bring it back at a later date.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, does anybody have any additional comments? Otherwise, it sounds like we're ready to adjourn.
No comments from Mark.
Charlie, you got anything else?
Nope, I think I'd like you to adjourn.
Okay, Kate, do you have anything else?
Nothing else. Thank you.
Daniel, you don't have anything else?
I do not. Thank you.
All right, well, Daniel, I hope you're recovering well, and I appreciate your working on this during your recovery period, and hopefully the next time we meet, you'll be fully recovered. I don't know what you had done, et cetera, and I don't really want to know, but best wishes in your recovery. So with that, then we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you, Marshall. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.